My name is Johanna, and I live in New York City, USA. This incident took place in 2007. For a while, our office team had been planning a camping trip. One day, we decided to take a week off and go camping in a snow-covered forest. We all spent the entire week preparing for the trip. The gear we packed included warm clothing, tents, bright lights, special snow-clearing tools, heaters to stay warm, dried food, and water bottles. The location we selected for the camping trip was the snow-covered forest near the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona. The forest was blanketed in snow, and its beauty was like nothing we had ever seen before. I, along with my team and everyone else, thought it would be a fun and relaxing trip. Little did we know, this trip would change all of our lives. We set out on our journey and headed toward the snowy forest in Arizona. Everyone was excited, and as we started our trip, we laughed, joked, and admired the beauty of the scenery. We crossed obstacles along the way, pushing our vehicles through the snow, and kept moving forward. As we got closer to the forest, there was an odd feeling among us, perhaps a sense of isolation, but for some reason, it felt like something in the snow-covered forest was watching us. We finally reached the campsite and set up our tents in a large open area. We lit a fire and sat around it, chatting and laughing, exchanging stories about our trip. The stars twinkled on the snow, and a light breeze gave us a sense of mysterious calm. There was something special about the air here, as if everything was quiet and peaceful. However, as the night deepened, an eerie silence started to settle in. It was an unnatural silence, something that felt different from the usual stillness. Strange whispering sounds began to emerge between the trees. At first, we thought it was just the cold wind, as it was common for trees to creak and crack in the chilly weather. But as the sounds grew closer, we all looked at each other. The sounds were unlike anything we had heard before, like someone was whispering between the trees, or perhaps something was approaching us. We thought it was just the trees shifting and the wind making noise, but deep down, a question began to form. Is this really just the wind? We tried to brush it off and continued chatting, but there was an unsettling feeling inside us that wouldn't let us relax. It felt like the forest was slowly enveloping us, as if something was watching us. The eerie silence seemed to have a purpose, and we wondered if we had unknowingly reached a place where we weren't alone. Despite trying to comfort ourselves with the firelight, the sounds and feelings kept intensifying. There was a strange stir in the air that seemed to awaken something deep within us, making us feel like there was something in the forest that we couldn't see. Yet, we pushed the thought aside and reassured each other that it was just the trees playing tricks on us. But deep down, one question echoed in our minds. Could it really be that simple? One night, as we were all sitting around the fire, lost in the deep silence, we suddenly heard Arash scream. He shouted loudly and pointed towards some movement beneath the trees. We were all stunned, and for a moment, none of us could understand what was happening. Arash's face had turned pale with fear, and he said, "Did you all hear that? There's something here, something hiding from us." We all looked down at the spot where he had seen the movement. For a few moments, none of us had the courage to approach and check. We were paralyzed with fear, our hearts racing. There was an odd sense of tension in the air, as though the forest had taken us in its grip. We fell silent for a while, then Arash said, "It must have been a response from some animal. Surely it was a snow creature that we saw moving between the glowing trees." The thought brought us some relief, and we turned our attention back to the fire, sitting down again. But deep down, there was a strange unease, as if we had just comforted ourselves with a false reassurance. A few hours later, we felt the movement again, and this time, it wasn't just visible, but the sounds were getting closer. It was like something was approaching us, and we could hear each step clearly. We were all trembling with fear, and no one knew what it was. Suddenly, it felt like there was no escaping it. The rustling sounds came from between the trees, and as they grew louder, it became clear that this wasn't just an animal response, but something else, something we weren't ready to face. The next day, after feeling the eerie silence and fear from the night before, the group decided we needed to get out of the forest. We thought spending more time there could be dangerous, and it would be better to head back to the city. But as we began our journey, we realized that a snowstorm had blocked all the paths. The thick blanket of snow had trapped us, and we were struggling to recognize the routes. We tried walking through the tangled paths in the freezing cold, but with every step, we felt like something was following us. There was a strange sensation, as if someone was walking behind us. We couldn't see it, but it was there. The sounds hidden beneath the trees were unsettling, as if something was whispering to us. Sometimes the sounds felt so close that some of us turned around, but there was nothing in sight. This feeling was shaking our nerves. Our hearts were pounding, and none of us could reassure ourselves that it was just our imagination. The sounds and movements in the forest silence were constant companions, and we felt as though we were being watched by something that couldn't be seen, but was certainly felt. We focused more on our gear and the paths ahead, but the fear and mysterious feeling were growing. In the cold and panic, we began to see our surroundings in a new light, and we became convinced that the forest was trapping us. We were only trying to get out, but the presence behind us made every step more terrifying. One day, exhausted and terrified, we were talking amongst our group when Lisa suddenly noticed something between the trees. She took a few steps back, staring at the trees with a serious expression on her face. She quietly said, "Look, there's someone standing behind the trees." We all immediately looked in that direction, but saw nothing. There was a particular fear in Lisa's eyes, and a sense of unease in her voice. We all focused intently, but the person she mentioned was nowhere to be found. Lisa insisted, "It was just there, I'm sure of it." We were a little shaken, but we thought it might just be an overactive imagination. Maybe it was a shadow moving behind the trees, one of us suggested, and we tried to dismiss it, convincing ourselves that it was just a product of our minds, especially in such a tense atmosphere. However, as we continued forward, it felt as if something was watching our every move with malice. Then, suddenly, Lisa stopped again and said, "Look, it's showing up again, but this time, it doesn't look like a person." We froze in shock. Whatever was behind the trees looked more strange than human. Its bones and body structure were unlike anything human. We quickly moved toward it, but as we got closer, the creature vanished. We rushed to examine the spot, but there was nothing there. A strange emptiness and fear filled our hearts. None of us could speak, and we simply exchanged silent glances, as if everyone's mind was asking, "What did we just see?" After a while, we tried to convince ourselves that maybe it was just a trick of the mind, but the feeling lingered. What we had seen was not human. There was something deeper in the forest that we couldn't comprehend. That creature might have been surrounding us, and we were only witnessing a fragment of it. This experience terrified us to the point that we couldn't fully dismiss it. We had thought we were just being spooked by harmless animals or our own imaginations, but now we knew that something far more mysterious and terrifying lurked in the forest. Eventually, tired and frightened, we reached a marshy area. The ground was soft and slippery, and with every step, we had to move cautiously. The cold air seemed to seep into our bodies, and the eerie silence of the forest surrounded us. As we moved forward, the ground suddenly gave way, and we fell into a deep ravine. The accident frightened us even more, but it also brought us closer to a new reality. After falling into the ravine, we tried to walk for some distance and soon came across the entrance to a cave. It wasn't just a shelter. As soon as we entered, it felt as though this place held more than a temporary refuge. It was hiding another secret. We tried to see inside with our flashlight, and what we found was beyond anything we could have imagined. Inside the cave, we saw ancient markings and symbols that indicated the presence of humans or other creatures from a time long past. As we examined these markings, we soon discovered that this forest was not just a local myth. It was home to a mysterious creature that had been dwelling here for centuries. The secret of the forest was that the creatures had been hiding in this area for thousands of years. Their purpose wasn't just to keep their prey alive. They lured those who would never be caught into their domain. These creatures would observe humans closely, and when they became careless or distracted, they would strike and trap them. When we realized this, a chill ran down our spines. We realized that the creature wasn't just lurking behind us, watching us, it had already ensnared us in its trap. In that cave, we saw everything we had never imagined. We had heard of these creatures, but we never knew they could be so close. This story not only shows the struggle for survival, but also the fear born from the things that remain hidden from human sight. When we learned the truth, we understood that sometimes the things we can't see are the most terrifying. The forest's secret overwhelmed us with fear, and we realized that there was no way out. We had been trapped, and the creature was never far away. In a remote village of Alaska called Nordic, the winter season was at its peak. Every year, the polar night would last for 6 weeks, during which the sun would never rise. The snow-covered region was enveloped in darkness and silence. The locals were accustomed to this season, but this time, something unusual was happening. It was the winter of 1997. Villagers began reporting strange movements of shadows on the snow. These shadows did not resemble humans but were of bizarre and irregular shapes. During the icy nights, when the wind howled through the alleys, these shadows seemed to roam freely. Initially, people dismissed it as a trick of the mind, but fear took hold when a young boy named Daniel went missing. Following Daniel's disappearance, a local newspaper dispatched an investigative journalist, Margaret Heller, to uncover the truth. Margaret was an experienced journalist who had covered numerous mysterious stories. She arrived in the village with her team, only to hear eerie accounts from the locals. "These shadows rise from the snow, as if alive," said Oliver, an elder of the village. "They watch us and, sometimes, take someone with them." Margaret brushed off these stories as folklore, but one night, as she peered out of her window, her heart skipped a beat. Shadows were indeed moving on the snow. They weren't human. Their forms were twisted and grotesque, visible even in the absence of light. Determined to uncover the truth, Margaret and her team began investigating the phenomenon. They learned that the village was once home to an ancient tribe. According to legends, the snow-covered lands were inhabited by spirits that punished intruders who dared to disturb their domain. One night, Margaret and her team decided to film the moving shadows. Armed with cameras, they ventured to the outskirts of the village, where the shadows were most frequently spotted. As soon as they began recording, the icy wind grew stronger, and a dense snow fog enveloped them. Amidst the fog, the shadows began to emerge. "What is that?" one of Margaret's team members whispered in fear. The shadows crept closer. Margaret felt as though they were searching for something. The team instinctively stepped back, but their cameras had already captured the eerie, shifting forms. The next day, Margaret decided to visit the oldest house in the village, rumored to be the origin of the shadows. The house belonged to a reclusive man known locally as the Ice Keeper. According to the villagers, he held the key to understanding the shadows. The Ice Keeper revealed that the shadows were the result of an ancient curse. It had all started when the villagers began selling and exploiting the pristine snowfields. Margaret pressed for more details, and the Ice Keeper explained that the spirits punished those who desecrated the purity of the ice and snow. He warned her that if the exploitation continued, the entire village could fall under the shadows' wrath. That night, Margaret and her team set out again, this time accompanied by some villagers. When they confronted the shadows, they observed that these spectral forms targeted individuals who had disturbed or sold the snowy lands. Margaret made up her mind to expose the mystery to the world. In her report, she wrote, "This is not just a tale of icy shadows but a warning against disrupting the balance of nature. These shadows serve as a reminder of the dire consequences of tampering with the natural order." Her report brought global attention to Nordic Village. While the world watched, the villagers vowed to protect their snowfields. Over time, the shadows began to diminish, retreating into the icy wilderness. Though Margaret had uncovered the truth, she knew some secrets were best left untold. As the villagers preserved the sanctity of their snowy lands, peace slowly returned to the village, but the memories of the shadows lingered in the icy air.